It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello, and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are talking about A Sweet Sting of Salt.
Well done.
By Rose Sutherland. Thank you. Would you like to do the plot, or shall I?
I can give it a try.
Give it a shot.
Jean is a young, prickly lesbian midwife in early 19th century Nova Scotia. And one day, a woman who does not seem to speak any English comes running through her backyard, basically, just about to give birth. And she delivers the baby and realizes that this woman is married to her neighbor who lives, across the woods. And she slowly realizes that the relationship between the woman and her husband is worse than she thinks. And there's a great deal of drama. Not my best.
Well, I mean, you're leaving out like a significant aspect of the story, which is sort of the crux of the book, because the book doesn't work if you
don't know that it's a Selkie story.
So is this a spoiler or not? We kind of spend the rest of the episode discussing that, because even though the reveal comes very late in the book itself, it's in the first line of every review or synopsis I can find.
And honestly, it's real obvious from the beginning that this woman is a Selkie. So, yeah.
Yes, and that is kind of the issue. But we'll get into that. Are there wizards in this book?
No, but there's Selkies.
Yes, this is a wizard-free one. But as you established, there are lesbians.
There sure are lesbians.
And since it's a Selkie story, you know who the lesbians are going to be fighting here.
Yes.
Barely deserves mentioning.
Yes.
And he doesn't really rise to the level of a wizard.
He really doesn't. He's mostly just kind of pathetic. There's a brief period in the book where he feels genuinely threatening, and the rest of the time he's just kind of pathetic.
Yep. So, why should you read this book?
I think that if historical lesbian Selkie romance set in Nova Scotia sounds like your kind of thing, then you should go for it. It's got some sweet moments, and it pretty much hits all the beats that you would expect going in. Yep.
It's got some interesting-ish Selkie world building. And it does have a lot of local flavor about it. So, yes. If you want a Selkie story, this is certainly one of those.
And, it is a fairly... Also, if you want, a fairly sweet lesbian friendship to romance, between a prickly midwife and an abused wife, it's sweet.
Yes, there are nose nuzzles.
There are nose nuzzles. It's cute.
Why shouldn't you read this book?
It just kind of plods.
It hits a bunch of my pet peeves, unfortunately. From the minor one, where this is another story where you can't explain an emotion without reaching for a body part where the emotion is taking place.
See, that genuinely doesn't bother me, because that's generally how I process my emotions.
I know. Why I say it's a pet peeve is because I know that this is not something that other people share. But if you do share that, then this book does that, possibly to an unprecedented extent. And also, it's one of those books where the thing faster than the focus main character knows the thing,
and it's really frustrating given the pacing in this book is just completely off.
Oh, the main character figures it out very late, very, very late, and if that kind of thing leads you to tearing your hair out, don't read this one.
And it's not even just very late. Like it just feels like it's dragging on to all, you know exactly where it's going, and it just takes too long to get there.
Yes, I mean the thing is that I think that the book's pacing only works if you, the reader, don't know that the main character, that the woman is a Selkie.
I don't know. I think that if you're mostly just really invested in watching the relationship develop and how are we going to get her away from her husband, but I think it would have worked better if
I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say I think this would have worked better if this had not been a supernatural story.
I mean, there is sort of that, or honestly, if this had just been like, honestly, if Mirren had just taken the plunge and tried to explain it sooner.
Yeah. No, I mean the thing is that like for 95% of the story, this could be just a kidnapped wife who doesn't speak English, which would have been kind of a more interesting story almost.
Yeah.
And
in some ways, the Selkie makes the solution too simple.
yes, and I think that I would have preferred otherwise, but we will discuss that more in the spoiler zone. Content warnings, obvious for a Selkie story: kidnap and rape.
That's the big one.
Yep, threats of violence.
And harm to animals.
Harm to animals. Yes.
Harm to named pets.
There is no dog in the story, but one of the pets gets it.
Not the one that you'd necessarily expect, though.
Yes, but I think that is pretty much it. All of the aforementioned sexual violence happens off screen.
Happens off screen and mostly by implication.
Yes. So, shall we get into it?
Yeah.
Baby, we're gonna talk about a kiss from a girl who's a seal. Yeah, that's pretty much this book's whole entire deal. And now that you know that that's true, we're gonna spoil you about the rest.
Though, it's kind of funny because I almost feel like this one doesn't need a spoiler zone. Just explaining the plot plus the word Selkie, and basically, like, there's nothing left to spoil, honestly.
Well, this is the problem.
Right. This would have worked a lot better if this would have worked a lot better, I think, as a novella, or even like a long short story.
Let's start out by discussing the things that we liked. You
go first, because I think you'll take less time.
This is one of the few stories that I've read that I could comp just with operas. Because it's kind of Peter Grimes meets the Cunning Little Vixen. Peter Grimes. Peter Grimes. That is a opera mashup jingle. And it's just for me, really. Not just because they say the words "the cunning little vixen" and there is a cunning little vixen in here. Mm-hmm. But the opera Peter Grimes, for those not familiar, is about a fisherman who keeps adopting orphan boys to help him with fishing, and they keep dying on him until the village decides that they need to do something about Peter Grimes.
Wow.
It's a harrowing tale.
How many orphan boys does it take?
I would
expect the threshold would be fairly high.
Not in this village. It only took 2. And they weren't particularly happy about the first one. It's a few. It's a few.
The society's tolerance for child abuse is pretty high, so...
Well, it's also a metaphor about him maybe being gay, possibly. As are all of Benjamin Britten's operas. So there is that element of it. But sadly, our fisherman here is very heterosexual.
Well, there's the gay sailor.
Yes, we do. Hello, sailor. We do have a gay sailor in here
I guess
who,
technically we have two gay sailors, but Dahl only shows up near the end.
through an act of astounding narrative convenience, has managed to find himself one of those rare Spanish sulkies to have a complicated relationship with. Uh,
So they all speak Selkie.
yes, which is not Gaelic. It turns
Actually,
out.
that I really liked. It's such a it works, especially because you do know that she's a Selkie fairly early on. Like you're probably not picking up the book to read it unless you know that there's a Selkie involved, and so the fact that Jean is just like, oh, this must be Gaelic. I actually, for me, it was actually a fairly effective running joke.
Yes, I would like to give the. It might have been a more effective running joke if she hadn't, in fact, been raised by a Scotsman, um, because she does also speak Gaelic.
No, see that to me that made it even better. Is okay, it's she speaks Selkie and also Gaelic,
Yes, she's.
but the language that she's babbling that Jean can't understand is Selkie.
And I want to give a shout out to the audiobook narrator for giving Mirren an accent which is like Russian babushka, but with Scottish vowels, which definitely brings forth the alien quality that one would want.
Nice.
So good job there. Good job to the audiobook narrator generally. So yeah, I liked that. I liked the general depiction of Little Town.
Mm-hmm.
I liked the sort of the outcast. Like Jean is a pretty well drawn character. I The unfortunate thing is that the because of the narrative, she is dumb as a bag of hammers. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that that's not. I think that does her a disservice because I think the character that she's supposed to be is smart. You know.
Well, and the thing is that she's smart in certain ways. Like she's actually very good. She's good at her job, um, and she's just really. I mean, so to be fair to her, you wouldn't necessarily assume that somebody is a Selkie.
No, not at
Like,
first.
I mean, how long would it take you to decide that your weird friend is a supernatural being and not just like autistic and not speaking the language? The real thing is, it would start to be a running joke. Even if you didn't believe it, it would start to be a running joke, I think.
I think, I mean, the question that I find myself asking, and I think hopefully the question which we will end up spending most of this episode talking about, is what is the Selkie story for and what is the Selkie story about? Because if I had heard a Selkie story, and it is established that she has, I think that if she had never heard of Selkies, this would have made slightly more sense. But, like, what is a fairy tale for, right? Uh, this is a question that has come up many times on the show, but in specifically, what is a Selkie story for? When I twigged to the fact that she had been abducted by this man, I would have thought about Selkies. Because what is the Selkie story about? It's about a woman who's been abducted by a man, right?
Right.
It's the sort of the instructive core of the Selkie story is about why men probably shouldn't kidnap women to be their wife to be
Right.
their wives, because the moral of the story is that it doesn't really make for a long-term happy marriage. The husband here is stupider even than Jean, because he's heard these stories and did not get that that was the point. But I feel like Jean would, of course, understand this, and that might have brought it to mind at that point, particularly what with the webbed, hands on the baby and the special thing that she has to get back from her husband and all of that stuff.
Certainly when she saw the seal skin. That, for me, that was the point. Like, because again, she doesn't strike me as the sort of person who believes in the supernatural.
No.
And if you don't believe in the supernatural, then you really can't, you can't expect somebody who's really committed to not believing in anything supernatural to Even if they've heard, you would expect her to make the comparison somewhere in her head, like, oh, this is almost like a Selkie story, except, those aren't real.
I mean, if she had just thought that at some point,
That would have made it a lot better, yeah.
that would have made it easier for me to take. It's like, surely not, because then, and yes, we didn't really need the emotional beat after she sees the seal skin. Also, because it seems wildly out of character. I know that she's just been through a horrible trauma, but still.
Yeah, no, that scene just didn't work at all for me. I mean, at that point, like, then she freaks out and runs away when that has never been her response to anything.
Yes, it's
And that she, like, starts screaming. I mean, at that point, even if she's still, like, deeply committed to not believing in the existence of supernatural beings, the idea that Mirren might just be insane seems more, that, like, this is some sort of mental illness that she has where she believes that she's a Selkie, seems way more probable to me.
yes. Like, I mean, in the defense of the narrative and in the defense of Jean, she's just been through like the worst trauma of her entire life. Um, she's seen a man die, and she might be a little bit emotionally on edge at that point.
A man who is, assaulting her and then is killed.
Yes.
And then she has to, like, deal with the body.
But even the particular way that she reacts, even under those circumstances, seems wildly out of pace with what we understand about her up to that point.
Yeah.
And it seems to just be there to. I don't even know what it's supposed to do in the structure.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I got to that point in the book and it was like, there's an hour left of this audiobook now. What could possibly there be still?
Right.
Are we going to get an hour of epilogue, an hour about like Selkie biology? What? And we get this scene where it sort of establishes something that the theme of like, of like mistrust and needing this the woman to prove herself to Jean was just not present in the book up until that point.
Right, like part of the core of their relationship is this kind of mutual care and trust. Like, that they have initially they have no real reason to trust each other, and they do, and that, like, forms the core of their relationship.
Yes. And so, like, and it takes like maybe 10 minutes for Jean to get her head screwed back on and was like, oh, right, no, that I was just acting insane.
Yeah, but she does, right. And then she runs back. I guess it's so that you can have the dramatic scene where she runs, where she, chases Mirren and dives after her into the ocean.
Yeah, but that scene didn't really do much for me anyway, because it's like, what are the stakes here? Is that she drowns herself like an idiot. I mean, obviously
right.
it's not going to happen at this point in the book.
Like, it's clearly a callback to her dad's trauma around her mom drowning. Her mom having postpartum depression and killing herself by drowning.
Yes.
But, again, it doesn't work. Partly because Jean doesn't really seem, Jean does not seem to have inherited that trauma. Like, she's really scared of postpartum depression in like, her patients.
But she's not scared of drowning.
But she's not scared of drowning.
Yeah, she's not afraid of the water.
And she's not afraid of the water, and she's not afraid of anybody else drowning. And so, nothing about that scene worked.
Yeah.
About that entire sequence of scenes worked. It's just like Jean just suddenly gets stupid for plot reasons. And it's not even plot reasons that, like, drive the plot forward. It's just plot reasons that drag the reveal out.
Mm-hmm. So, like, if we remove the Selkie from this story, right? I think that there was a point about, like, halfway through, and I think that it was, again, if you remove the when is she going to find out element, I think the pacing is okay, honestly. Just as sort of as a quotidian series of, daily events with, like, the creeping dread of what's going to happen to Miriam.
Yeah,
sort of.
I felt like it took a little too long for the creeping dread to start ramping up, is all.
I mean, fair enough, but it still makes more sense than what we got, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like about halfway through the book, I'm like, there is some genuine horror about like what do you do under these circumstances when this man has done something and there are no authorities to appeal to. Um, and
Right. And that was great. Like,
yeah,
that it was actually it was some good creeping horror, and there's the sense that the more that Jean tries to do even small things to be like even the tiniest lifeline to her abused friend, that this is met with retaliatory violence, where he kills one of Jean's goats, and keeps threatening to kill the fox that lives nearby, and
yeah,
there's this implicit, you live out in the woods, if I come and kill you, no one's going to notice, especially because you've pretty much refused to make friends with anybody because you're worried that they all hate you because you're gay.
mm-hmm. And like also I think that we could probably have at least had the fox be injured by this. The fox basically getting out of the snare scot-free, it was like, okay, these are the stakes of the book.
Yeah, except that then the goat dies.
Yes, this is true. That did come out of nowhere a bit, but I didn't really have an emotional attachment to the goat the way that I did to
the fox. Yeah, no, and that felt like a flinch. And I mean, I would have been very upset had the fox died.
Obviously,
but the fox, yeah, it did not. It felt like a flinch that nothing ever happens to the fox. Not even just like even if it was just her mutual trust with the fox is forever shattered and the fox runs away. But even that doesn't happen.
Yes. No, this we're given all of our happy endings here.
Except for Honey the goat.
Except for poor Honey the goat. But, I mean, but speaking of things that I liked, I did like that she has to bring all of her livestock inside her house at that point. So when her poor ex-girlfriend, and the ex-girlfriend character, also a thing that I really liked. I thought that was good.
Yeah. No, that I thought was pretty well handled, including the ex-girlfriend being like, yeah, well, I didn't want to do this, but my husband isn't a monster. When he realized I'd been we'd both kind of been shotgunned into this marriage, he was like, what do you want to do about this? I will let you set, like, that was a good token good straight man moment, even though he
Absolutely.
never really appears on screen.
No, he gets the token good man award for this book, certainly, even though he never appears.
Token good straight man, because we've got Laurie and Dahl.
But I mean, we've also got Miriam's father, who
uncle, I think.
Uncle, who couldn't interfere with this for magical reasons. Rolls my eyes, but
yeah, that also I didn't like.
But yes, no, this book isn't misandrist. It's just it's concerned with the dynamics of abuse, and I think understands those pretty well. I liked that our bastard was at least given, a backstory, some reason why he thinks and acts this way.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a thread with him that I wish hadn't been dropped. And when I say I wish, the book would have been far more harrowing and unpleasant, but I think it would have been better.
Mm-hmm.
He's like creepy and sort of gets and like attacking her boundaries at the beginning in a way which suggested to me that maybe one of the plot lines was, well, he's got one wife, why doesn't he just get another one? I thought that was going to be where that was going. And I think that would also make sense given his character to like, well, why don't we get this attractive, midwife in to be my wife's like companion and maid, and maybe I get two wives out of it, but no, that's not where we go.
Well, the thing is that one, I don't think that that's actually a real threat given the like the thing that makes him holding Mirren captive so plausible is that was totally within the laws and social norms of the time. Like, people would tisk, but he'd brought home this woman who nobody had really even seen, other than, the day they got married. And everyone's just like, well, yeah, that's weird. and it doesn't occur to anybody to worry about it. Oh, well, she doesn't speak the language. And so there's nothing, and there's nothing Jean can do, but they would have frowned on, they would have gotten weird about their midwife moving in.
Yes, this is probably true. To be clear, I don't think this would have made for a better story. It's just about zeroing in on what kind of bastard this man is, who's kind of a complicated bastard in the end. There's good bastardology in this book.
But I think that he could have done more to like trespass on her boundaries.
Yeah. Again, flinch, I think, is the word.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of good creepiness that is sort of built up there and then just sort of dissipates.
Yeah. Which that was the part when I liked the book best, is, when you're getting this sense of built up creepiness, because she is out in the woods, and is she going to and it actually, for me, it really worked that she always has an out. She can always move back to town and live with her mentor. But if she does that, that's writing off her friend / love interest who's being horrifically abused.
Yes.
And who really can't escape now that she's got a baby. So that worked. And in a weird way, honestly, I thought that the fact that she kept clinging to her, I'm going to stay here because I'm an independent woman, was really frustrating, because it's like, no, that's just stupid.
Yes.
Right? Like, I'm going to stay here because if I leave, I'm afraid that, Mirren will never get to speak to another human being who isn't her awful husband or her baby again. That would make sense, but that's not mostly what's going through her head. Mostly what's going through her head is, well, I've always lived out, on the edge of town, and I like it that way.
Well, once again, in the book's defense, that's actually not the majority of what's going through her head. The majority of what's going through her head is, if I leave, that will make it seem like I am admitting to what he's accusing me of. And a big part of Jean's character is her internalized homophobia, which I think is well observed.
Yeah. No, that's a fair point.
That she is her, I mean, this is part of why her sort of decision making is really tied up in knots, is because she's dealing with a lie very close to the core of herself, which it's very important for her, almost as important as, like, trying to save her friend, to keep behaving as if that lie is true. And so I think that probably is, that goes a good way toward explaining some of her dumber decisions as we're going through the book. But
yeah,
not
I think
the
that's
sulky
fair.
part.
Other than the sulky part.
Yes.
Yeah, honestly, if she just, she should have just made a joke about it, even.
I mean, the problem,
especially because she loves seals.
Yes. The problem, that, as I see it with this, is that I think that the author thinks that it will come as a surprise to the reader.
No, it can't.
I think
it opens with a seal. Also, like,
yes.
Does the author not understand that books generally get pitched with things like historical fiction, sulky wife, lesbian novel?
Well, I mean, the thing that I'm basing this partially on the actually quite bad author's note that is appended to this book, which, the author's dead and all, but unfortunately she saw fit to add some more information to the text. There's some meta text here, which I get to react to. And it's in the audiobook for once. Why is the supplemental material only in the audiobook when I don't want it to be?
Which, shout out to the audiobook for actually including that.
Yes, but the author's note starts with, "This is primarily a work of historical fiction," invisible brackets, not fantasy. I don't think that the author wants to be doing genre.
Oh. So you think that a lot of this is distaste for genre? No, actually, that makes sense, partly because that also explains why Jean just, like, refuses to even think about it, by this generation of genre, fantasy, the problem tends to be almost that the protagonists are too genre savvy.
Precisely.
And, immediately go, oh, she must be a Selkie the minute that they see her.
Yes,
And
I'm obviously in a zombie movie right now,
right,
sort of,
exactly.
which is infuriating in its own right, mind you.
Right, which is honestly even more annoying. But yeah, but that insistence that that of withholding any of the magic until the very very end, and then sort of dumping it all on you at once does strike me as something that by somebody who is not really immersed in genre.
Yes, I think that this is my contention based solely on this meta text that is in this text and nothing else is that this is not an author who is particularly versed in genre fiction, and as such is not writing with a genre reader in mind, and that's why it's structured the way it is. And the big reveal is that oh, we are doing genre after all, and that's meant to be a surprise.
Yeah, except I suppose only if you're expecting to market this to readers who that this would work. That would totally work 20 years ago, before most people got their book recommendations off the internet.
Yes, no, it's not realistic under the circumstances, and as such, it creates this weird, tension where, as you might have, as the listener to this podcast might have noticed at the beginning, or like, is saying that she's a Selkie a spoiler or not? And it can't be, because how is this book recommended to us? It's
right.
a Selkie story.
Right.
And further along in that metatext, the author's like, I mean, we couldn't have avoided the Selkie business, although perhaps we could have. But one of the things that the author was trying to do here was to air her grievances with Selkie stories, in a way which to me suggests that she doesn't understand what a fairy tale is.
Well, in a way, it suggests to me that, again, I think your interpretation of sort of not being up to date on any speculative fiction, because at this point we've long since done, the straight / the feminist-ish reading that's mostly just like the fairly superficial reading of the story, and then we had the backlash where people all had to make it romantic, and now we're like going towards the backlash to the backlash. So yeah, the idea that you would look at a Selkie story and not go, oh, this is a cautionary tale about basically marriage.
Yes.
Don't get trapped in a marriage, and don't trap someone in a marriage. I want to bounce off from that specifically in just a second, but I do want to say that this compounds my feeling that this is an author, yet another sort of straight fiction author who is entering genre without like seeing what has already been written about this in this space, and it shows. I will shout out again the excellent short story Selkie Stories Are for Losers. Yes.
That we covered a while back, which has a whole different take on the whole thing, which actually did feel fresh.
Yeah.
But let's talk about like Selkie Stories as a cautionary tale for marriage, because this story includes things like happily married Selkie and human couples who got together on purpose. It's not our main character, but it's in our main character's family.
And eventually it's our main character.
There's that thing where she like makes a show of offering Jean her seal pelt, and Jean is like, absolutely not. We're not going to have that kind of marriage. Thank you very much. Which is probably the most wizards versus lesbians moment in the whole book.
Yeah, and honestly, that one also felt a little bit false to me, because like, just that Mirren, I mean, obvious, like, it's an obvious test, right? And that Jean I mean, I guess we've established Jean is not very bright in certain ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so, perhaps that she just immediately flinches away instead of seeing this as an obvious test is reasonable for her personality.
Yes, but it made me think like, okay, then what is the Selkie story, right? Like, is the Selkie specifically a woman who has been kidnapped, or is the Selkie meant to be a woman who should not be married? You know?
Or, well, the thing is that I think there is a read of the Selkie story that is there is this read of, oh, you get, you can get your magical wife. And if you take away the stealing the pelt or, watching your wife weave her crane feathers, or, whatever because there's always the thing, because sometimes there's the version of the story where, not the Selkie story, but the, kind of related one, magical wife one, where it's, you're trespassing on her boundary of, she says, never look at me under these circumstances, and you do, and then she leaves never to be seen again.
Yeah.
And so, I think that this is, and in both cases, part of why the story works is that you're supposed to see, you're supposed to be able to see the appeal, I think. You're supposed to understand, even though you're supposed to understand why the husband takes the pelt.
Yes, you are.
Especially if, in the tellings of the story where initially they're getting along, and she wants to marry him, but he hides the pelt away from her, and she can never be a seal again.
Right. Like the part of the story I think that really resonated with me, if we don't even think about Miriam as a Selkie, is like he got her pregnant.
Right.
And now they have to be married, which is, I think, a part of the metaphor.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely the Selkie pelt, that being baby trapped is like what is one of the things that the Selkie pelt can represent. I mean, it's right. That or just, losing your virginity in a society that doesn't let you do that. But
exactly.
But it works. But it works better when it's a metaphor for having a child, because then it makes sense that it's when the child gets old enough to discover the pelt in the attic, that's when the mom can leave.
Right, when the child is no longer an anchor. Yeah, no, it an emotional anchor or a practical anchor.
Yeah,
I think that that's a lot of it, but and so thus the being offered the pelt and refusing is like, well, what? I can't get you pregnant,
right?
But I mean, real talk, like we're both married.
Yeah.
I think marriage means something, particularly if you're going to do it in a setting where it's not, society telling you that that's what you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the sort of the gesture of giving over the pelts is weighty enough. It's like, if we are going to be married, then we are going to have some sort of inextricable magical thing that has happened and cannot unhappen without a great deal of like woe, basically. And I think that doesn't stop being true just because it's two women, or because it's it's not under the same sort of set of violent circumstances. So I think marriage means something, says Isaac. Those of us who are sort of skeptics about the whole nation, family, and God thing do have to kind of make up a new meaning for it. Or don't, It can be for tax purposes. But there are so few little areas in life where you can invest meaning in a durable and meaningful way. And I think that marriage is one of them. That makes me kinda gay, okay.
Well, but the thing is that there's in some ways two kinds of marriage, right? There's two ways in which marriage is binding. One is, you know, in is sort of is your relationship sanctioned by the community and, and to each other, and the other is your marriage binding by law. And these
Right.
are two really different things, particularly in an era of no fault divorce and also no marriage equality. Like 100 years ago, you would not be able to say we're married, the two of us.
Yes.
My marriage would not have been like legal at all, and yours would have meant something very different. And part of, I mean, some really interesting things actually historically about marriage and like the Anglo-American legal tradition, which is what we're talking about here. Where there's this long period of time where basically marriage is the one contract that a woman ever gets to enter into. It's the one time where she gets to make, be a full contractual actor, and she gets to say yes or no. But if she says yes and she enters into this contract, she basically loses her legal personhood in a variety of ways.
Yes.
She can't become a lawyer because she's, can't have lawyer, attorney client confidentiality because she has a husband. And I think to some degree that is kind of that is also in a way what the Selkie Pelt is. It's you have your freedom, and once that is taken away from you, you can never really get it back while your husband's alive.
Indeed.
And she can give it to Jean, and Jean can lock it away, and that would be terrible for Mirren, but Mirren could still leave in a way that she couldn't leave Tobias, her husband.
Yes. No,
and she could also rally
sense.
like her uncle and aunt and parents in a way, and to take her away and to take her pelt back from Jean in a way that, again, they couldn't do that from her husband.
See, these are interesting thoughts. I wish the book had delved more into this specific aspect of the difference between the pair bonding between Mirren and Jean, and between Mirren and Tobias, because it's clear that Mirren, in her sort of simple animal way, is like, no, I want to be you wife, not him wife, and it's and I think that's a really good sort of dive into the actual meaning of what that difference would have been in this time in this place.
Yeah, and I mean, the book does touch on it briefly when Jean is talking with her mentor about, well, what can I do? And the answer is
the book is very
nothing.
Clear on the women, on the rights of women in this period,
but not necessarily
well
on sort of what it means to enter into a marriage. And though the best friend character also, to some, one of the things that I really liked about her story is that it is still essentially a bit of a tragedy. I mean, she's made a happiness with her husband, but she's still the one Anglophone in a French-speaking community. She's still isolated. Her French isn't very good. And, she's found a way to make it work for her. But she
is just lucky that this guy is decent, and has thus been able to make the best case of a bad situation, when, in fact, like, she has no control over whether he would have been even as decent as he has been or not. It could have just as easily been as bad as Jean thought at any point.
Right, but the thing is, even if he's decent, if she doesn't like the community, she's still stuck. If she never manages to integrate into her community, for language reasons or cultural reasons, she doesn't have any recourse.
If he's really decent, they could move.
Except, at that point, of course,
it's entirely his decision.
Yeah, it's entirely his decision.
But yes, no, it's not looking good for being a woman in colonial North America, or really anywhere in the world at that time.
but it's also just, this is a particularly bad time for being in any contractual relationship. I mean, this is
It's
also, the era of really terrible labor contracts, for example.
oh yeah, no, this is the part of this is the time in the world where the English are who are running the worlds are operating their navy by essentially a pyramid scheme. Um,
Right.
this is this is actually the time in the world when unfettered capitalism is being tried, and this is one of the results of that. And speaking of which, in the author's note, the author is very clear that she doesn't care that she got what a privateer is wrong in this story. She's like, that's not important. But she still got what a privateer is wrong in this story. And
It is a little bit annoying because the author's note talks about, about all the research and how realistic the town is.
yes, which she got magically via intuition.
Yes.
But no, the privateer was not operating outside the law. Privateers don't operate outside the law. That's why they're privateers and not pirates. But I now that I've gotten that off my chest, and be with us for Aubrey Maturin in a few weeks. But that's not, as the author rightly points out, that's not important unless you're a nitpicker like I am.
So, what do we think about Laurie and Dahl? Because I liked them as characters, but their story felt kind of tacked on to me.
Yep. No, they're meant to be I mean, part of the reason that they're there is to make that final sequence feel like it has some sort of emotional, foreshadowing in the book. But that didn't work either.
No.
Unfortunately.
No, and again, that actually is a great example, is that Laurie could have just explained the Selkie thing to Gene about why he's, on the outs with his boyfriend right now, of, well, it turns out my boyfriend lied to me about being a Selkie. And then so much of this could have been avoided.
Well, there's this weird Selkie omerta thing that is going on here,
yes.
which is never actually expressed. It's just like, it's a secret, period. And and like, which and we're not entirely sure why, or how this affects like the magical rules of Selkiedom, or whether they're under sort of a gayish not to talk about themselves, or what. It just makes everything very inconvenient.
Maybe that's why it doesn't occur to Gene, is that maybe there's part of the Selkie magic is that you just can't talk about it until you've actually seen them transform or something.
It clouds men's minds, and that's why they've been kept to the realm of folklore for so long. Despite Selkies apparently being everywhere, that there are seals, which is a lot of places, including Spain.
Yeah. That was also minor thing of, so wait, do all the Selkies of the world speak the same language? Because that's highly improbable.
What is the Selkie social structure like?
Well, it's just, if you have a Spanish Selkie and an Irish Selkie, how their Selkie dialect should be pretty divergent at this point.
Yes. Do Selkies have a civilization? The moral of the story here, as I see it, is that if you take a fairy tale creature and write a novel around it, you have to either do world building or no world building. Making it all a mystery is fine. Inventing a world in which the myth can plausibly exist is fine. Dealing with the implications as they come up leaves the reader thinking too much about the existence of Selkie-human hybrids and whether that explains why Iceland is the way it is. And actually, I'm asking this again because it gets at sort of my sort of instinctual understanding of the Selkie story, which is like, when I think of the Selkie in the Selkie story, it's like, I think you are trying to put a person who is not compatible with the social structure of the world into the social structure of the world, which is the crime that you're committing in part. and which is why it doesn't work in the end, is because you can't turn her into a wife because
Right.
she's always a free animal, you know, like she's a mysterious woman animal deep down, and you know,
Or, she just comes from a completely different culture and wants to go back to that.
right. This is also like why maybe you shouldn't make the slave that your people captured your wife, because maybe she's gonna have feelings about that down the line. But the but the sort of the vision that we have of like sulky husbands and wives and like sulky adventurers and like the sulky family unit, um it makes me think about it too much.
Yeah.
In a way that sort of undermines the metaphorical heft of that, like of that wild thing that needs to go back to the wild, that feels like a part of what the Selkie mythos is all about.
Right, because on some level, this is saying no. You actually can have all the magical wife stories that I can think of off the top of my head. They end, and 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 they don't end happily for the marriage. And this is saying, oh, you can have your magical wife so long, and with all of that magic of the seals, but without having to do world building of, oh no, there's an entire seal culture. I don't know. It just, yeah, it raised questions about Selkie civilization that it was not prepared to answer.
Yes, I think that is correct.
I did like, though, language-wise, I did like the way, looking at all the different ways that language barriers are isolating and are used to isolate people. And, the way that Jo, for example, her husband is a decent person, and so she's learning French.
Right. Like I did enjoy the detail of like how profanity is so important in this culture, that Tobias teaching her the word fuck and telling her that it's just a nice is meant to be like a time bomb that will explode her social standing.
I mean, the thing
That she'll
is, it
simply be
might.
shunned. I'm not saying I'm not saying that's inaccurate. I genuinely liked that.
Yeah.
I thought that was cool and clever and
That was cool and clever, and it was a good sign that he's. I mean, first of all, it makes it clear that what he's doing is deliberate. That all
Yes.
that isolation is deliberate. It's not just him being lonely. It's him deliberately isolating her, and also that he's smart enough to take real steps.
Yeah. No, he's not a dummy. He's just not good at interpreting fairy tales,
Right. Nobody in this book is good at interpreting fairy tales.
including the author. But yes. um I this is just, and as an aside, whenever I mention the Arne Thompson index, understand that my tongue is firmly in my cheek.
Yes.
It's not real. what what they're doing is not real. None of the Joseph Campbell shit is real. It's all just lumping and splitting and having fun. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
I just want to make that clear, and not in light of anything that the author may have said in their notes. But anywho, um, let me take a look at my notes, since we're getting to the end here. Do you have any?
No,
anything
I think I've said basically everything I can think of to say about this story.
Yes.
I will go back to I did actually, until that last part of why the Jean's freak out over the seal skin rang so false to me, is that up until then I really liked all the beats of their relationship.
It is a sweet relationship, and I'm pro nuzzling in fiction, for the record. Okay, this is another pet peeve.
All right.
Another nitpick. But I wrote down a few sentences like that appear in the close first person from Jean's perspective that is the book. Like, a wife is a husband's property under current law, and the village social life revolves around church activities, which seems to me to have been directly copy pasted from the historical sources.
Yeah.
Or Wikipedia if you're being ungenerous.
Yeah, no, and that's and particularly that's not really in keeping with Jean's character, where she's not actually she's oversensitive.
She's living in this world. It's not under current law.
Right,
this is the world that she lives in.
Well, the thing is that it could be under current law if Jean had any real ambitions to, change it, but she doesn't.
Or if she's
and the thing is, she doesn't really even think about. She only thinks about law and, for that matter, social norms and social rules in terms of how they can punish you if you break out of them. How they're restrictive, which makes sense and is a good character trait for her. But it means that when she steps outside of, when, her mental voice steps outside of that, it is pretty jarring.
Yeah. So that's just the thing. You've already shown us this. You don't have to tell us.
Right.
This.
There's also that. I mean, also we can just kind of infer that the village's social life is going to revolve around church.
Yes, because we are passingly familiar with the early 19th century.
And also, it's pretty obvious when she goes to church, and also when she tries to convince Tobias to take Miriam to church.
Yes. So yes, that is all. That was clumsy. You don't need to do that.
Or do it, but edit it out on the next pass.
Yeah, I mean, just little things. Don't assume that we don't know what a selkie is either. Come on. All right.
I'm still not convinced that this is supposed to be a twist.
Well, I mean, if it isn't, then it's maddening for no discernible reason. All right. But I think it's a perfectly fine, it's a perfectly fine read. It's just, I think that if I wasn't coming into it with with criticizing and talking about it for an hour in mind, it would probably not, these things would not jump out as much, but that's the nature of the beast.
Yep.
But as far as that goes, I think that we are done.
Yeah. I think we've wrapped this one up pretty thoroughly.
Yes. I imagine that we might be doing this LA China book.
We are absolutely doing The Manor of Dreams next episode. Oh my God.
Okay.
Thank you, whoever recommended it to me, to us. Thank you for recommending. You probably couldn't know how much this was, designed to appeal to me personally, what with all the Hong Kong references.
Right. So look forward to that one. And we'll see you then.
Bye.